Hello and welcome to Dangerous Ideas. I'm Lee Camp. This is the show where we get down to core reality. We don't just talk about that surface shit like everyone else, right? Got to get down a little deeper. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. So here are my opening thoughts about the Psy-Ops world in which we live. And I'll start with an example. With a big example that's in the front of the news right now. Right now, there's an increasing amount of evidence that Israel is not just torturing Palestinian prisoners, which has long been known, but that one of their torture techniques is actually rape, using sexual violence on Palestinian men and women who have been abducted by Israel. But it gets worse. The sexual violence documentary that has just been put out by Sheryl Sandberg, seen there on the screen, former head of Facebook. And this documentary is being promoted by the White House, heavily promoted by Kamala Harris, promoted by Debbie Wasserman Schultz on CNN, etc. This film is largely, almost exclusively, based on the confessions, quote unquote, of many tortured Palestinian prisoners. These so-called confessions were brought out using torture and quite probably, according to increasing amounts of evidence, sexual violence torture. So in one of the most disgusting, Orwellian, propaganda psyops of our time, a large-scale U.S. government-backed documentary pushes a false sexual violence narrative about Hamas, which I've gone through all the debunking of that story. The New York Times having to retract several of the things that were in their expose. The main journalist of that expose saying in podcasts that she was able to find no evidence of the things she ultimately said she proved, etc. Anyway, the U.S.-backed documentary pushes a false sexual violence narrative about Hamas, while the actual true sexual violence is being perpetrated by Israel. And this is just the latest and arguably the most disgusting, but this is just the latest in a long line of psychological manipulation efforts, projects, operations in which the U.S. and Israel accuse enemies of doing the exact thing they're doing. Let's go through just a small taste of recent U.S. and Israeli psyops, and feel free to add some of your own in the comments in the chat, because I clearly could not create a list of all of them, or we'd be here until ancient Rome returns. Anyway, starting off, Hamas. We'll start off with the psyop claims, and then I'll also mention the truth. Hamas took innocent hostages, and even though that part is true, Israel has taken 10,000 hostages, half that before October 7th, while Hamas right now has maybe 100 hostages. Number two, Hamas uses human shields. The only literal human shields that we've seen since, in this ongoing genocide, this ongoing war in Gaza, the only human shields we've seen is actually the IDF, which video has been going around of this, the IDF driving around with Palestinians tied to the front of their vehicles. Literal human shields. That's the only video we've seen of human shields. Hamas, number three. Hamas kills innocent people. Israel has killed 40,000 innocent people in just a few short months, and that does not count famine. It does not count disease. It does not count many of the ways people die when you destroy an entire society. Number four, am I on? Yeah, number four. Hamas does not want this war to end. They're keeping it going. In fact, Israel has either pulled out of all of the ceasefire deals, or they have put poison pills into those deals to make sure that Hamas would not agree to them. An example of these poison pills would be, after we exchange all the hostages, Israel has the right to continue their genocide. And for some odd reason, Hamas did not agree to that. I don't know why. Israel has said clearly also that if there were a deal freeing the hostages, they would continue their campaign of ethnic cleansing anyway. And that was even reported by neoliberal Huffington Post. Next up, Hamas does not care about hostages. They're treating them poorly. In fact, Israel has killed countless number of their own hostages. They killed them on October 7th under the Hannibal Directive, which has been also reported on by the UN and by many Israeli outlets. And they killed them after October 7th, such as killing them with bombs, killing the, I believe it was 2 hostages that came out waving white flags, and they shot them. They are killing their own hostages. And finally, just on my short little list here, Hamas wants to wipe Israel off the map. In fact, Israel is literally wiping Gaza off the map, and Netanyahu, among others, has held up maps of what he claimed is the Middle East, showing Palestine erased from the map. Literally. Okay. And he did that in front of the UN. So I don't think it's not really secretive that he did that. Here are some of the US Psy-Ops over the past few months and years. The US wants an international rules-based order, right? That's what we're told again and again. No one violates international law more than the U.S. We are the kings of violating international law. There is no law that the U.S. abides by. So the idea of U.S. representatives getting in front of the world stage and saying we want an international rules-based order is on its face laughable. Next up, the U.S. wants democracy around the world. The U.S. has destroyed countless democracies around the world and seems far more comfortable with right-wing fascist dictators in power than democratic leaders. We have brought down most or many democratic leaders around the world. On top of that, the U.S. does not have a democracy at all. At all. Large studies have shown that what the American people want does not happen at all. It's just what corporate America wants. Next up, the U.S. cares about innocent civilians, right? We want to help those innocent people around the world. In fact, according to the Brown University Cost of War, the U.S. has murdered between 4.5 and 6 million people, most of them innocent civilians, just in the global war on terror, just in the past 20 years. And I believe that study was a couple of years ago, so that's not even counting recent years. 6 million people. No one is responsible for direct deaths the way the U.S. is over the past 20 years at all. Not even close. The U.S., next up, the U.S. accuses China of genocide, right? That's something our so-called leaders were telling us for a while, that China is committing genocide. But meanwhile, even in their accusations, they're not saying China killed anyone. So that's an odd type of genocide without any murder. But on top of that, the U.S. this is a U.S.-backed genocide in Gaza. This is a literal genocide in Gaza, while the U.S. accuses others of genocide. The U.S. says Russia wants to take over Europe. U.S. and NATO have taken over Europe. Russia does not want to take over Europe. Russia wants Ukraine to stop being a tool for NATO to be on the Russian border. But Russia does not want to take over Europe. The NATO, however, has very much taken over Europe. It has signed security pacts, which mean military alliances with most of Europe. And so the U.S. and NATO have taken over Europe. Next up, the U.S. says Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked, right? It was unprovoked. It was provoked, because why else would they keep saying it was unprovoked? And of course, I've brought you all of the examples of how it was provoked. So every time they say it's unprovoked, just hear the word provoked. That makes more sense. The U.S. says China and Russia and Iran are threats to global peace. But we, of course, know that the U.S. is the one with hundreds of military bases around the globe, 800 and 900 military bases around the globe. Also, we sell weapons to everybody. So the weapons that are raining down from people that are not even U.S. backed were probably sold to them by the U.S. anyway. The U.S. has fought a global war on terror. That's another psyop, we're told. They fought a global war on terror, when in fact it's a U.S. global war of terror. I already mentioned the number 6 million of innocent people murdered during our global war of terror. And finally, perhaps at the top of this list, is every time the US calls another country terrorists. Syria, Iraq, Iran, Palestinians, Russia. Every time the US calls another country terrorists, it's the US that is the terrorist. It's the US that is behaving as terrorists. It is the US that's killing innocent people in order to manufacture consent, in order to manufacture a world that doesn't question US rule, in order to allow US corporations to extract all of their resources. There's many reasons in order to stop them from moving outside the petrodollar. But every time the US accused someone else of terrorism, it's because the US is doing some terroristy shit. We are living in a false reality at every level. It is one psyop after another. It is one gaslighting after another. It is one load of bullshit after another. And now the White House is pushing a film about sexual violence that is based almost entirely on confessions by people who were tortured with sexual violence. It's unbelievable, the level of Orwellian awfulness that they will put us through. Here, I'll just pull up some articles real quick about Israel's violence, torturing, and sexual violence on prisoners. Here's Amnesty International. This is in November of last year. Israel, horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment of Palestinian detainees amid spike in arbitrary arrests. Arbitrary arrests mean innocent civilians being arrested for no reason. Here's from BBC. Released Palestinians allege abuse in Israeli jails. That's also from November of last year. And here's even CNN. They don't publish these type of stories much, but there are a couple. This is from February of this year. UN experts demand investigation into claims Israeli forces killed, raped, and sexually assaulted Palestinian women and girls. So I'm sure the White House's and Kamala Harris and Sheryl Sandberg's film on Israel's sexual violence will be out any day now. Any day we're going to see that documentary that they've put together, spent a lot of time working on, I'm sure. Well, that's the intro. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Thanks for being here. Good to see Reese in the chat. What is up, Reese? And yes, everyone should click like, click subscribe, click share, become a member, all those good things. And as I mentioned in the comment thread, that my channel could get banned at any moment. I've had other channels banned. Obviously, my largest ever one was banned. In order to keep in touch in case that happens, it would be amazing if you could sign. It takes 3 seconds. Sign up for the free email list at leecamp.com, my website. When you arrive there, you should get a pop-up that lets you sign up for the free email list in case this channel gets banned. All right, let's move on. I got loads of other news and coverage for you. Unfortunately, this is some bad news. Indigenous activist Leonard Peltier, his parole was denied, and he's been in prison since 1975. It's for the killing of 2 FBI agents serving warrants, but it's been pretty well proven that it was not him that actually killed the FBI agents, and yet he's in prison anyway, all of this time. The U.S. Parole Commission said in a statement Tuesday announcing the decision that he won't be eligible for another parole hearing until 2026. Peltier is serving life in prison for killing the agents during a standoff at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. He was convicted in 1977. But there's also the fact that sorry to say the fact twice in one sentence. There's also the fact that on top of the fact that if you were to take all the facts in this case and you were to look at the facts, there'd be a lot of facts. And you'd say, I see some facts right here. On top of the fact that he did not murder the 2 FBI agents, even if he had, we should not keep people in prison for 1,000,000 years. Most other countries do not have lifetimes in prison. It's insanity. It's insanity. And we have the largest prison state in the world. Just remind you of that. For some reason, I seem to be one of the few that likes to mention that fact. Largest prison state in the world, largest prison state per capita in the world, largest prison state by number in the world. And it's part of the reason because we have these utterly insane prison sentences, not just for murder, but for everything. People locked up, for life because they stole a candy bar. That's a real thing that happened. I think that one might have been Texas, but it also a man was locked up in Louisiana, or I guess is still locked up in Louisiana for life for stealing a jacket. I imagine because he was cold. But they have these 3 strikes laws where let's say you're selling drugs. Oh my God, that is a bad guy selling drugs. But should a drug seller be locked up for life? But let's say he gets 2 drug dealing charges, and then the third one is stealing a jacket, and they lock him up for life. Then the punishment becomes actually more morally repulsive than the so-called crimes. Let's move on though. But yeah, that is sad about Leonard Peltier. Obviously we can celebrate that Julian Assange is out, but Leonard Peltier is still locked up, and hopefully he gets out next time around. It is amazing that these sad sociopathic human beings who run our systems are the one to keep punishing someone. They probably don't even remember when it happened, but just want to keep punishing him. Here's another important story from the gray zone. So I brought to you the other day how Congress has now removed the ban on giving U.S. weapons to the neo-Nazi Azov battalion in Ukraine. There's also reports now that the Azov battalion, which, although neo-Nazis, I don't know what the exact percentage is of Ukraine's military that is neo-Nazis. It may be only 5 or 10%. But the thing is, if you are the most violent and the most fascistic and the most willing to kill and maim over your beliefs, the neo-Nazis kind of run the military systems there. And I've seen some reports that Zelensky has basically been told by the Azov battalion that if he were to sign any kind of peace deal, that it would be, quote, very bad for him, which, you know what that means. Now, the thing is, I don't view Zelensky as some kind of peacenik who's been just bending over to the Azov battalion the whole time. I think he is also a lunatic, but it's quite possible that there could be some sort of peace deal, except for the fact that the neo-Nazis want to fight to the death. Anyway, but this news is about the Azov battalion profile has quietly been removed from Stanford University's extremist group list. So Stanford created a list of extremist groups, and now that Congress is sending weapons to these neo-Nazis, Stanford has decided to also remove them from the list. Stanford University's Mapping Militants Project, a U.S. government-funded initiative that conducts research on violent, militant, or extremist organizations, quietly removed their profile in the Azov Battalion early last month. The Azov Battalion, now known as the 12th Special Purpose Brigade, is a Ukrainian National Guard unit infamous for its use of neo-Nazi insignia, which was also covered by the New York Times. The New York Times covered the fact that they have swastikas and other neo-Nazi insignia on their uniform. The New York Times was trying to defend it by saying, they don't really understand how upsetting that is. Does anyone really think that there's a lot of Nazis out there who don't know what Nazi is? Do they really think? The New York Times expect us to believe that there's loads of Nazis running around who just don't know what Nazi means? I don't think so. Let's see. Unit infamous for its use of neo-Nazi insignia, recruitment of far-right foreign fighters, and alleged war crimes. The Stanford MMP's mysterious removal of its Azov profile was followed about a month later by the U.S. State Department lifting its ban Oh, I didn't even sorry, I missed that when I first read this. I didn't realize that they removed it before the US State Department lifted the ban on military assistance to the Azov Battalion, raising questions about the motives behind the removal of the webpage. So it would seem that the US knew this was coming down the pipe, that they were going to start sending weapons to the Azov Battalion, and so they went to Stanford and probably asked them to remove their list of their entry of the Azov Battalion in their extremist mapping project, which of course then just brings into question the entire extremist mapping. If you could just pull one down of neo Nazis, oh yeah, erase that one off the internet. Just scrub your screen a little. If you can just do that because you want to send guns to Nazis, then what the hell is the rest of the list? Just whatever the U.S. empire says is good for them? I mean, quite possibly, but I'm just saying. Okay. Thank you to all you here, all you supporting. And if you throw in some super chats, that's awesome as well. Thank you to all you who have become members. And let's keep all this going into the coverage that your mainstream media will not give you, refuses to give you, absolutely won't tell you about. I want to get to this article by the New Yorker about they're basically laying the groundwork, and it's not just the New Yorker, but it's think tanks, etc., laying the groundwork for a war with China, which is so horrific on so many levels. It's absolute lunacy. But there are many ruling elite in the United States who view this as a existential threat to the United States empire, to our hegemony. We can't dare have another country with a larger economy. Thank you, John, for the donation. Solidarity. And so therefore they'd rather have what could ultimately spiral into nuclear war. But even if it's not nuclear war, who knows how many will die. And so they'd rather have that than just let go of some of their ownership of the globe. And here's from the New Yorker. Catastrophic wars can start in peripheral places. Sarajevo for the First World War, Gleifitz on the German-Polish border for the Second World War. The contributors to the Boiling Moat from the Hoover Institute, a pro-war think tank. So they're saying this book, The Boiling Moat, is a short book edited by Matt Pottinger. But they believe that Taiwan, the democratically governed island situated off the coast of Southeast China between Japan and the Philippines, could spark a major war, possibly even a nuclear one, pitting the U.S. and its allies against China. Now, I'm going to try and point out some of the propaganda in this, but there is a lot, so I'm not going to get it all. But throughout this article, they pretend that Taiwan is a separate country from China. Yet there are 12 countries in the world that acknowledge Taiwan as a separate country from China, and several on that list are countries you've literally never heard of, or at least I never had. I think Nauru might have been one of them. On top of that, you know who says Taiwan is part of China? China says that, but so does the United States. It's actually still official policy of the United States that Taiwan is part of China. And you're allowed to say, I don't like that. You're allowed to go, well, it's not fair. But pretending it doesn't exist is just pure propaganda. At no point in this do they mention to your average American who probably doesn't know that Taiwan is part of China. To continue from the article, according to their estimates, more than 10,000 Americans could be killed in action in just 3 weeks of combat. 3 weeks of insane combat. Why would you start this combat? You pieces of human garbage. That's not from the article. That was just me throwing that in there. The cost in Chinese and Taiwanese lives, again, that's just Chinese lives because Taiwan's part of China, both civilians and soldiers, would presumably be much higher. And that is assuming that a local war doesn't spread to the rest of the world. Pottinger was the Asia director on the National Security Council under Donald Trump, and so his opinions are worth paying attention to. I mean, if you're the National Security Council under Donald Trump, your opinions are actually less worth listening to than just about anyone in the world, because you're a war criminal, and you're a war criminal who is under a war criminal Donald Trump, and so you're a disgusting sociopath. So anything you say, no one should listen ever again, ever. And instead, of course, New Yorker, along with all U.S. propaganda, says, listen to this man. He knows his stuff, like how to best commit war crimes, how to best murder innocent people. He's really good at it. From the article, unlike previous Chinese leaders who were on the whole content to let the Taiwan question rest until some kind of peaceful resolution could be found, Xi Jinping has avowed that unification of the motherland is the essence of his campaign to rejuvenate the Chinese nation, and has indicated that he is prepared to use military force to bring that about. Again, this article refuses to mention that the U.S. says Taiwan is part of China. I feel like that note is kind of important. The U.S., along with like 190 out of 200 countries around the world, say Taiwan is part of China. And I will repeat, I'm not saying you got to love that. You know, there's people in Texas who very much hate that Texas is part of the U.S. I'm not saying you got to love it, but you kind of got to acknowledge it. The people in Texas who do not want Texas to be part of the U.S., they all acknowledge that Texas is part of the U.S. So that's the level of propaganda going on here. They then continue, if a Chinese attempt to take Taiwan by force were to succeed, that's just the opening half of the next sentence. To take Taiwan by force, it already has Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. I feel like someone needs to go and like grab the collar of this, right? It's part of China. You can say you don't like it, but it just is. It just is. Oh, these lunatics. But the thing is, they know it shows how much they think of their audience. They know they're talking to dummies. Not all dummies, but a lot of dummies. And so they just know they can say this and that most people won't even know. Well, I guess China's getting ready to steal a country. Steal country, no good, steal country. It's kind of like they know that most Americans do not know the history of Ukraine or Crimea or the Donbass region. They don't know that that Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and in that way, many Russians, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Russians, they were living in Ukraine, they were living in parts of Russia, they were living on the border. They didn't, for generations, they didn't view it as being, I'm in one country and you're in another. And I read a great quote. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know the exact words, but it was a quote by someone, I believe, living on the Ukrainian side of the Russian border. And they said, someone came and said, oh, there's this border here that basically goes through your family. You know, the cousins are on the other side and you're on this side. Someone came and put this border here. And for a long time, decades, no one really cared that they said that border was there. We just went back and forth. Wasn't a big thing. And then people started caring more and more. And then they put up a barbed wire fence and said, you're in a completely different place than your cousins and your family. And we were like, wait, what? And that's what the Donbass region is a lot of Russians that were culturally Russian, that were speaking Russian in what was technically called Ukraine. And then you had neo-Nazis coming and murdering people for speaking Russian and being Russian in this part of Ukraine. And since 2014, up until the Russian invasion, 14 or 15,000 people had been murdered by this war that was ongoing because they were just culturally Russian, living in a part of Ukraine that they had not decided they didn't decide they were going to be Ukrainian. Someone just put a line there and said, this is what you are now. So now we're trying to do the same thing with Taiwan. We're trying to create a war in which China has to go to war to try and defend, the idea that Taiwan is part of China. Here's a little more from the article. Pottinger and his contributors think that the only way to stop China from launching an attack on Taiwan, which is part of China, and possibly starting a devastating war. Oh, yeah, who's starting a devastating war? The U.S. is. We're filling Taiwan with weapons. We're putting weapons all around Taiwan. The U.S. is absolutely starting this war. And then the sentence continues. The only way to stop a war is to build such a formidable system of military deterrence that China wouldn't dare. Okay, couple of things. And that's why the book is called Boiling Moats, is because the point is they're going to make the sea between China and mainland China and Taiwan so egregiously weaponized that China doesn't know what to do about it. And then they list the type of weaponry that is going to fill the waters off China. Because, you know, the safe and diplomatic thing is to put U.S. weapons just all over the water at the coast of China. How would the U.S. respond if China started filling the waters between Cuba and Florida with Chinese weaponry? How would the U.S. do? Would we be cool with that? Totally fine. And of course, that's not even a fair example because Cuba is not part of the U.S., although the U.S. wishes it were. But a couple of things about this. Does that not sound like we are starting the war if we're filling the waters off of China with weapons? It's not China starting that war. B, it says China wouldn't dare. China wouldn't dare what? Go to Taiwan, which is part of China? China wouldn't dare go to a part of its country? So insane. And of course, this New Yorker article is basically saying, oh, this is an excellent and smart book on Taiwan. No, it's a sociopath's book on Taiwan. It's sociopath fan fiction on what they'd like to see happen to create war with China. And this is also what your mainstream media is. So remarkably repulsive, aren't they? So remarkably repulsive. All right. It's always tough to know what to do next, but I'm gonna go with these. I'm gonna play some clips between George Galloway and Piers Morgan next, and kind of break them down a little bit. Both because George Galloway does great, but also because it's fun to point out how awful Piers Morgan is. What a lunatic he is. But if you guys could just take a minute and hit subscribe, hit the bell icon, all those good things. I'm constantly facing suppression and censorship. So those kind of things really help the show, really help keep the show going. Whether you're a member at rumble.com/LeeCamp or youtube.com/Moment of Clarity, all that helps. Couple of just fun things is the podcast, which you can find on any of your podcast networks. It's called different things, but if you look for Lee Camp, you should find it. On one, it's called Moment of Clarity. On another, it's called The Lee Camp Show. That's on Spotify. But anyway, that podcast now updates after every live stream. I mean, in the hours after every live stream. Thank you. Don's just became a new member on YouTube. Yes. And by the way, if you become a member on YouTube, if you want to support, if you're just looking for a way to support the show, the best thing is to become a member at Locals. That's $6 a month. The YouTube version is $3 or $2.99 or something a month, and you don't get all the perks of Locals, but you do get a bunch of YouTube videos that are for members now only. They used to be for everybody, but now they're for members. And so if you want to go back and watch, some live streams from just a couple of days ago, those are all for members, and they're sitting there waiting for you if you do that. Anyway, so the podcast is now updates within a few hours of the live stream. So if you want to hear the daily news like I do right here, 3-4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, if you want to hear it and you can only throw on the podcast, you're in the car or whatever, it's pretty heavily updated pretty quickly. So, it'll only be about a few hours behind. And that's called Lee Camp Show on Spotify and Moment of Clarity on other platforms. But anyway, okay. Let's see some Piers Morgan and George Galloway. Now, all right. Hobo Rhodey also became a member. Solidarity, good sir or madam. I suppose a hobo roadie does not need to be male or female. You can be whatever you want to be, hobo roadies out there. So Piers Morgan had George Galloway on. Piers Morgan, disgusting, awful human being who will. His thing is his career now seems to be having on people that just school him, and I mean like painfully school him on issues, but often Israel and the genocide they're perpetrating. He and George Galloway have known each other for years and years because they're both old school Britain. They've been around a long time. And I want to jump into this. I'm going to play several minutes because it is a good conversation. It also says a lot of things about how people are viewing this genocide, this ongoing conflict. And we'll see. I'll try not to interrupt too much, but I will. I'll interrupt too much.
Completely unprecedented for one day of slaughter that we have seen.
I don't know if I missed that, what he said there or not, but anyway, he's saying that, I'll just play it.
That it was going on have not emerged well from history. And I think the same will be true over this.
I have used the phrase from the start of this that I have felt a genuine moral quandary. And I'll explain to you why and get your response. So from October the 7th, I felt it was on a scale completely unprecedented for one day of slaughter that we have seen in that entire conflict, that it was so barbaric, so medieval, so inhuman in the way it was executed against so many, in the main, young, innocent people.
Now I'm going to let him keep going. And actually, Galloway is going to correct him about it's so unprecedented for a single day. But I want to correct him in a different way. Is if you he says, oh, it's so unprecedented for a single day. Well, first of all, you've had to move the goalpost to try and come up with a reason that October 7th is worse than what Israel has done on every single day of 270 days of genocide. And so in order to move those goalposts to come up with a way that, no, October 7th is worse than anything Israel's done, he had to say it's unprecedented in a single day, as if as if the number in the day matters. No, I think the whole number matters. So for Hamas, you've got whatever, 600, 700, maybe less than that, innocent people that were not killed by the IDF on October 7th. It's probably less than that, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. For Israel, you have 40,000 at least, probably more than that if are lost under the rubble. So what does 24 hours matter? He's coming up with some false rubric for why October 7th is worse than anything else. And then on top of that, if you were to subtract the people killed on October 7th by the IDF, which is a lot, you're actually going to get a number that is not the least that's killed in one day. So even by his own standard, it doesn't fit. And then he says it's barbaric, it's medieval. But actually, Israel's genocide is far more barbaric and medieval for the sheer number of children harmed, for the sheer number of just straight up executions. Israel's is far more barbaric, medieval, the cultural destruction, the obliterating of hospitals. I mean, I don't have to go through the whole list, but the number of journalists they've killed, Israel's has been far more atrocious and barbaric. And yet Piers Morgan is trying to say, oh no, that one day was actually way worse than the 270 that have followed it. It's quite a mental gymnastics. I mean, he's got his leg over here mentally, his arm over here. One, he's got his face in his ball sack. He's the mental twisting and flexibility he had to come up with to try and make it so that October 7th is worse than anything Israel has done is impressive.
Festivals in kibbutzes and so on. That I felt you had to start this debate about what's going on with a clear denunciation of what happened that day. Then the question for me became twofold. The scale of Israel's response and what was proportionate. I didn't have that answer. I said I would see how it played out and make an assessment. And secondly, what was the end game and what would happen the day after the war ends? And on those second and third points, I have grown increasingly critical of what Israel's been doing.
Oh, so he condemns everything Hamas did on October 7th, but now he's critical. I've grown critical. It just took 270 days of genocide for me to grow a little critical. If during the Holocaust you were talking to someone about the Holocaust, about Auschwitz, and they said, I've grown a little critical, would you think that was enough? Would you think that was okay? Okay, as long as you're critical. No, I think it needs to be a little more than critical, buddy. A little more than just critical.
Particularly since they began attacking a refugee camp in Rafah where they've been sending everybody.
I love that that's his line. Oh, they were attacking yeah, that is horrific. So was the bombing of hospitals. The refugee, that's the one. What about the bombing of hospitals? What about the shooting of people who went to an aid truck to try and get food? Was that not your line? That wasn't okay. What about the regular, and I mean daily bombing of people in their house with their family? Israel would use this AI program to say, hey, that guy made 3 phone calls from 3 different phones. It couldn't be that he's a journalist or something else. It must mean that he's Hamas. So we're going to murder him, but we're not just going to murder him. We're going to wait till he gets into his family home, and then we're going to blow up his whole family. And a lot of Palestinians, they live, 3 generations in a home. So we're going to kill all of his cousins and his kids and his grandparents and parents and everyone we could come up with is all going to die in that single blast. And that's how we'll do it. That was not a red line for Piers Morgan. It was just when they moved on to the Rafah refugee camp. Interesting. Surprised you waited till then, huh? Good call. By the way, I also should have said before I started here, because I know some of you don't know every one of these things, that George Galloway is currently a member of parliament in the UK. Also, he is somewhat of a buddy of mine now. And I was just on his show yesterday. I don't know what day it is or where I am or where I am. What city am I in? Yesterday I was on his show. And anyway, he's always very kind to me. And by the way, George Galloway is old school defending the rights of Palestinians. He was beat up. He says beaten nearly to death. Has had such a scar on his scalp from the beating that's when he started wearing the hat. And this was, I think, maybe late 90s or early 2000s. And he was beaten by someone who was beating him for calling for free Palestine, for criticizing Israel. And that person had an IDF t-shirt on when he assaulted him. That doesn't mean the guy was IDF, but it means he supported him. And after the guy who served a certain amount of time in prison, I don't remember if it was a year or 2 years or something, for beating him, and I believe he was an MP at the time, so I believe he was in parliament at the time, that guy who beat him flew to Israel and was given a hero's welcome, and probably lives in Israel to this day.
And I thought that excuse of we're trying to be targeted to Hamas when it's clear that you can't be targeted when you attack a refugee camp, I thought crossed a line for me. But also cognizant of 2 things. One, Israel's right to defend itself and a duty to defend itself after the scale of what happened. And because...
And of course, that's a bullshit term. Most of you know that the whole Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, first of all, technically by UN law, you don't have a right to defend yourself against people in your own country. And technically, Gaza is a refugee camp because Israel has stolen all of that land. So Gaza is inside they have no country. So therefore, these are people that have been locked in a refugee camp by Israel. So you can't defend yourself against occupied people, just according to the UN stance. But on top of that, you'll notice only Israel ever defends itself. That's all they ever do. Everything they do is defending itself. If they, tortured someone, they defend tortured that person. If they blew up a hospital, they defend blew up that hospital. And it's all defending itself. Whereas anything Hamas does or anything Palestinians do, and there's Palestinians in the West Bank as well, anything they do, that's not defending. That's all aggression, right? That's all terrorism. That's aggression. They never defend themselves. So one side always defending itself, the other never defending itself. It's interesting the way that works, huh?
The Hamas spokesman said we're going to keep doing it. So they had that. But secondly, that uniquely in Gaza, half of the population of 2 million are under 18. Mm-hmm. This is a place that is jam-packed with children. Mm-hmm. And when Hamas embed themselves among civilians, as they do.
Well, where else could they embed themselves? It's a prison camp.
I accept that, and I'll come to that part of it. I'm sure there will be many parts of this debate where you and I will agree.
He's doing this trick where he does this rant, and there's a million falsehoods in it. There's a million factually inaccurate parts, and George Galloway is expected to just sit there and let him do it. And, you know, Galloway understandably is trying to be polite so that he's not just getting interrupted himself when he tries to respond. But it's so many falsehoods. Like, Galloway would have to be taking notes to undo all of the falsehoods in this statement by Piers Morgan.
There will be some where we don't agree. And I still have no evidence that there's any endgame plan by Israel. And I think you're now seeing the Israeli government fracturing with people recognizing there is no after the war plan, and it could be complete and utter chaos. And
there's no after the war plan because the war, it's not a war. The actual plan of this is ethnic cleansing. The actual plan is genocide. So you don't come up with a plan for after genocide. You just kill everyone. And that seems to be what, you know, Israel has given all signals to that being their aim.
There are certainly people on that cabinet, I think, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and others, who have been talking in a genocidal way about this. So that's where I am with this. But I've started a lot of interviews with pro-Palestinian guests, and I'll do it with you. And it's been a sort of controversial thing. People have sort of mocked me for it, but I kind of think it's a good starting point that to go back to October the 7th, when you realize the scale of what had happened that day, do you condemn what happened that day?
And George Galloway is going to answer here in a second, but I just want to say Piers Morgan does start almost every interview with someone who's calling this a genocide, defending Palestinians' right to exist. He starts almost every interview by saying, do you condemn Hamas? No one's asked him, apparently, do you condemn Israel? And he'll say, well, I'm critical of Israel. No, do you condemn Israel? But on top of that, no matter the answer of the person, and, you know, George Galloway's given a lot of time to speak here, whereas often the person's only on for 5 minutes. And if Piers Morgan starts every interview like that, then that means every interview, most of the time, is wasted on, will you condemn Hamas? Why won't you? Why will you? Whatever. And it's stuck in that debate so that they don't actually get to the genocide. They don't actually get to what Israel's doing. They just are in a loop of, will you condemn Hamas?
Well, I have to first correct you on something. It was by no means the single biggest slaughter in the Israel-Palestine chapter.
In one day?
In one day. In fact, in 5 hours.
He has to add in his bizarre little goalpost that he has put up. In 24 hours. I meant in 24 hours. Because that matters.
With Sharon on the roof shining a searchlight into the Sabra and Shatila camps in Beirut. 3,850 Palestinian women and children. There were only women and children because the men had all agreed to sail away to Tunisia as part of an American brokered deal. Now, younger viewers will not remember Sabra and Shatila, but those two names are burned in the minds of those older and who care about it. So that's triple the actual death toll on October the 7th.
Well, nearly 7,000 more were wounded on October the 7th.
Yeah, but the fact that you thought...
Now he's got to add in things. Well, let's talk about the wounded, too. That's not what you said. You didn't say wounded. You said murdered.
In this respectfully, that this was the biggest single day of slaughter is part of the problem. The lives, the blood...
Exactly. Piers Morgan is part of the problem. The ignorance of what is going on here is part of the problem. And Piers Morgan spouts that ignorance on a near daily basis.
Blood of Palestinians is oftentimes by commentators and politicians regarded as less valuable than the blood of Israelis. All the blood is a disgrace, all of it. And insofar as terrorist acts are committed by Palestinian organizations, by terrorists, I mean the harming, killing of innocent civilians, of course I condemn that.
So do you accept, on that then, do you accept, because the number you gave for the other atrocity, which is what it was, is disputed. You know it's disputed. So
the Sabra Shatila?
Yeah, the actual...
Well,
Piers Morgan says it's disputed. Well, if it was 3,000, what did he say? George Galloway said like 3,800. Okay, let's say it's disputed. It was actually 3,100. It's still way more. It's still triple the total number killed on October 7th, and that counts the number that were killed by the IDF.
Well, the death toll on October 7th is...
Well, I know you disputed, but there's more clarity about the numbers on that.
No, there isn't, because the Israeli media reports have not been reflected in Western reports. But the Israeli media all the time reports that significant casualties were inflicted by Israeli forces themselves, and deliberately under Netanyahu's Hannibal directive, which states that no one should be allowed to be taken hostage, kill them, rather than allow them to be taken hostage.
But over 230 were taken hostage.
Yeah.
And Piers Morgan skips the Hannibal directive discussion immediately, skips the fact that the IDF killed a lot of their own people, skips the fact that the IDF killed God knows how many, skips the fact that all the cars from the Nova Music Festival, hundreds I read, were shredded and buried in an undisclosed location because people would have seen that there were bullet holes in the roofs of those cars. And is it roofs or roofs? I guess it's roofs. Bullet holes in the roofs of those cars because that would be coming from a helicopter. Who had the helicopters? Fucking IDF. So, he skips over all that and just jumps to, but Hamas did. Hamas did. But Hamas.
And taking women.
And the latest figures
Yeah.
are that 1,143 people were killed in the initial series of terror attacks, 373 of whom were linked to security forces, 766 of whom were civilians. Now, you've questioned those before. Do you question those now?
No, I question who killed whom, but I don't eschew condemnation of the killing of innocent civilians. If you show me an old woman who was killed by a Palestinian fighter.
Well, they showed it themselves. They broadcast many of the atrocities to the world.
I absolutely condemn that. I also condemn the taking of women and children as hostages, whether they're taken by the Israeli government, and there are 9,000 hostages in Israeli dungeons.
Thank you, George Galloway. He's the first person I have seen, now maybe the second, maybe low-key or someone did it before. I have been going on and on about this for a while, but he's the first person on a mainstream show I've seen mention that Israel has thousands of hostages. He said 9,000. I often say 10,000. It's tough to say to know the exact number because Israel will often black bag these people, grab them up, and you don't know where they went. So it is tough to know the exact number, but all estimates say there were 5,000 before October 7th, and that Israel has probably doubled that number since. So this is such an important fact that should be said over and over again, and you cannot find it in mainstream media almost at all.
Are untried, not even charged. They're just held there as hostages. And I condemn the holding of civilian hostages.
Do you think what Hamas did that day was a terrorist attack?
Well, the parts that I'm talking about were undoubtedly a terrorist attack.
Right.
But if
look, I wasn't expecting you to say that, and the reason I think it's significant.
There we go. I wasn't expecting you to say that because that's my gotcha. I have nothing else. I have no other way to defend this genocide except to say, you won't condemn terrorism. Gotcha. That should be the new name of the show. You won't condemn terrorism. Gotcha. That's all it is. It's all it is. And he literally just said, I wasn't expecting you to say that. And all of my notes are just trying to make you debate that point with me. And my agreement is with Galloway's way of stating it. It's like, I don't support killing of innocent civilians. I have often said that a lot of what went down on October 7th, we don't know the numbers of. We don't know how many IDF killed. We do know IDF killed a lot of them. We do know that Hamas killed innocent people. We also know that almost everyone in Israel serves, I hate that word, almost everyone in Israel has been in the military or is currently in the military or at some point has been in the military. So therefore, a lot of them have guns and a lot of them are military trained. So whether the guy was at, whether someone running at a Palestinian on October 7th is running at them with a gun could be technically go down as an innocent civilian. And yet it was a military veteran running at them with a gun. So they were firing back. There's no doubt of that. But their goal, as we've seen in many statements, as Hamas has said, was to take hostages. And their goal was to take roughly 200 to 250 hostages. And of course, there were a lot of firefights. And of course, a lot of people were killed. But it does not seem like it was their goal to walk in and just execute people unless they were actual IDF and they did go into some of the IDF bases and execute people. But anyway, I agree with the way that Galloway is stating it.
George, is a lot of people are sat in that chair on the Palestinian side of this debate, and they have including Jeremy Corbyn, I might add, who have resolutely refused to condemn what Hamas did that day. And I find that very difficult to get past.
Well,
I've often...
Piers Morgan, because he did not know that George Galloway was going to say, I condemn executing innocent people, he went ahead and gave his argument anyway. He goes, I wouldn't expect you to say that. So let me argue with Jeremy Corbyn, who's not here. Let me argue with other people who I've brought on who aren't here. Like, legit, Piers Morgan has nothing because of what he thought George Galloway was going to say.
I've ended up with 20-minute debates, as I did with Corbyn about it, because I don't see how any human being cannot tell that what it is.
Killing innocent civilians, whether on London Bridge or on the London Underground or at a music festival, are terrorist acts because they are punishing innocent people for the crimes of guilty people. Now, I was underground as an agent of the ANC in apartheid South Africa. I was working for Nelson Mandela's ANC. I gave my blood on the floor of the Guguletu police station in Cape Town. Was the ANC a terrorist organization? The answer to that is no, even though they had people who carried out terrorist attacks. You have to understand the whole picture.
So I'm going to wrap it up there, but that's a great point about the ANC, about Nelson Mandela. There were parts of the group that committed terrorist acts because they viewed it as the way to achieve change. And as he's saying, he condemned terrorist acts then, but he does not view the entire group that Nelson Mandela was a leader of as a terrorist organization. And, the same for those fighting for Irish freedom. Anyway, this is basically what Piers Morgan does, is he has on people to debate. They run circles around him and make him look like a pro-genocide idiot. And yet that's his career. His career is now based on that, apparently. I will say I'm glad he's having on people I appreciate and people I'm friends with, like George Galloway, Abby Martin, Low Key, and others. And but it is sad that he has to keep pushing Cornel West. He had on that he has to keep pushing these pro-Israel, pro-genocide talking points, even as he does his little equivocating. I am critical of certain things that Israel has done, not the blowing up of hospitals. Fine with that. Love that. Big fan. Longtime fan. Blowing up hospitals. But don't like the refugee camps. Leave those alone. All right. I am going to... Let's see what I'm going to do next. I'm going to head over and do a special segment, a special comedy segment for those of you at Locals. So if you're at Locals, hang in there. If you'd like to see the segment I'm about to do, then you can join up at leecamp.net. That will take you straight to the Locals, and then scroll down to become a subscriber, and you will get the bonus segment. And I'm going to do an extra comedy segment over there on Locals today. I will be back tomorrow with Government Secrets. That's 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. I'm performing in Los Angeles July 11th. I don't get to perform live much, so this is a rarity. July 11th, Los Angeles, I'll be performing stand-up comedy, and then there'll be a taping of Government Secrets, the podcast, as well. And tickets are still available at leecamp.com, my other website. Go to leecamp.com and click schedule. I think I'm not going to be here Thursday because of July 4th. Not that I think everybody needs a lot of time to celebrate the American flag, but it's harder to get an audience when people are out grilling sausages or vegan sausages. So I don't think I'll be here Thursday, but I will be back Friday, I believe. So join me for that. And for those of you Locals, I'm coming to you right now with a special segment. Hang in there. And for those of you not joining me over at Locals, for those of you who think you're too cool to support this show, who don't want to throw 38 cents an episode to support something you appreciate. For those of you, goodbye, and I'm glad you were here, and I love you all. For those of you, I'll either see you tomorrow, Government Secrets, or I'll see you Friday. All right, everybody at Locals, or everybody who's headed to Locals, see you in 1 minute. I just have to change the streams over. And everybody else, keep fighting. All right, changing the streams. Here we go. Bow, bow, bow. How's everybody at Locals doing? I can't start yelling out your names